Hi, Chaos Free family. Let me ask you a question. What if some of the tension we experience in our relationships with family and colleagues isn't about effort, attitude, or commitment, but more about how well our brain's executive systems are supported? In her book, Glucose Revolution, Jessie Inchausen talks about an interesting study she calls the voodoo doll study. Researchers followed 107 married couples and gave each participant a voodoo doll representing their spouse. Each time their partner caused irritation, they were to place a pin in the doll. Now, some of these participants placed dozens of pins in the doll on a single day. Now, at the same time, researchers monitored their blood sugar levels or their blood glucose levels. Here's what they found. Participants experiencing these repeated glucose spikes and crashes showed significantly higher levels of expressed irritation. So, what's the connection? One hypothesis involves tyrosine. This is a precursor used in the production of dopamine and other neurotransmitters involved in the executive functioning systems that help us pause, regulate our emotion, shift our perspective, and respond rather than react. Now, when glucose is unstable, tyrosine and dopamine become less available, and our executive functioning systems are placed under strain. In other words, it reduces our access to self regulation and motivation. This matters profoundly for those with ADHD. ADHD brains already operate with less reliable access to dopamine. Add glucose instability, and it becomes even harder to access the fuel that supports task initiation, emotional regulation, and cognitive flexibility. What we often label as irritability, impatience, or reactivity is frequently an executive function bottleneck, not a behavioral choice. There's a predictable feedback loop that can be entered at any point. When the executive systems are overloaded, the body shifts into survival mode and cortisol levels increase, making dopamine less available for regulation. The brain seeks ways to bring the dopamine and cortisol into balance. And since sugar and simple carbohydrates can increase dopamine quickly, sugar becomes a tool for regulation. The body responds to quickly rising blood sugar levels with an insulin spike, and that works to drop the blood sugar to normal levels. This insulin spike causes stress on the body, and cortisol is released to manage that stress. So you can see it's a vicious cycle. But here's the reframe. Supporting our glucose stability is not about control or restriction. It's about reducing unnecessary load on an already taxed executive system. When the brain has steadier access to energy and dopamine, it can better do what it's designed to do: pause, prioritize, regulate emotion, and engage with intention. So, if our brains had more consistent access to the functions needed for regulation and motivation, how differently could we show up for the people around us? Wouldn't that help us live chaos free? Take care.